including the township attorney. The first item is Washtenaw Avenue Phase 2 and Reimagine Washtenaw. And we have Nathan Boat with us today. Can you just turn it on there?
Hello. Okay. It's the first time with a mask. It's kind of strange. First time I put on a suit, I think, in 2 years. So you'll have to forgive me. It's going to take some adjustment, I think. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Nathan Vogt. I work for the Washtenaw County Office of Community and Economic Development. I know some of you, others I don't, so happy to be here and introduce myself. I do a couple things for the county, not just Reimagine Washtenaw, but I'm the Brownfield Redevelopment Coordinator, and we've helped the township do some environmental assessments of various facilities over the last several years. We love helping out our local units and doing those sorts of things, and anytime you have a brownfield project that might need some cleanup or something, we can work on a brownfield plan and work with your developer and the township on accomplishing that. So we have a lot of resources that we can bring to help you deal with those sites. But Reimagine Washtenaw is a subject for today. As you know, well, this project, you can go to the next slide, sorry. I'll try to give you a hand signal. This project really started in the late 2000s after Pfizer closed, and you all got together with the city of Ypsi, Ann Arbor, Pittsfield Township, and really took a look at this corridor and the potential to achieve something greater and make it a true connection, multimodal connection between the two cities and the townships and getting people to the jobs, to the services. And so over the years, you all refined that vision, and I wanted to talk a little bit about it. And I looked at the number of slides here, and I'm going to try to move through them because I know you have a busy evening. So this is multi-jurisdictional, and this is cooperative. You all have joined the other 3 local units, MDOT, of course, the RIDE, and we sort of manage the project and kind of guide your vision that you have for the corridor. Next slide. The ultimate vision is to be a multimodal, a complete streets, a corridor with much more placemaking, a sense of place, more transit-oriented development, denser development. I'm excited to see the ordinance that you're looking at adopting, the form-based code, really encouraging the zero lot line development and denser development. I think over time that will really help achieve the land use part of this plan. And then looking at not plastering density up and down the corridor, but just at nodes. So in your case, it's Gulfside, it's Hewitt, and taking those and making those more special places over the long term. And then, of course, connecting the entire corridor with sidewalks as a basic way for people to get around, and of course, bike lanes as well. And that's really the sidewalk piece is what we're talking about tonight. And so the guide or the Bible that we use is the 2014 Corridor Improvement Study. It's been adopted by all 4 local units. It's been adopted by Washtenaw County. This is not just a vision. This is more of an implementation guide. It's a detailed guide for the cross sections that each community is trying to achieve, where there might be a right sizing of the road. And in the case of in the city of Ypsi, we're looking at a road diet, trying to get full sidewalks, of course, and some of that land use at the nodes that we're talking about. And of course, the public transit piece, along the corridor, enhancing transit, making it more efficient, making it easier to use. And that's an important piece of the vision for the corridor. And so I mentioned the nodes. Here are the nodes generally outlined in the plan. And you can see we want more for these nodes. We did a full study of Gulfside, a full build-out scenario. A lot of work has been done. We have design guidelines, et cetera. And so that's the vision for these nodes to be more special places along the corridor. And of course, pedestrian is what we're talking about today. And the goal has been just to complete the basic network. You know the conditions out there are fairly poor in certain areas. And so that's, of course, a centerpiece of this plan. Let's just get let's get the sidewalks in so people can get around. And I mentioned that everybody has adopted, all the 4 local units and the county have adopted this plan. to make it sort of official. MDOT has acknowledged the plan. We asked them to adopt it, but they don't do that. So they have acknowledged the plan, and they've been a partner since day one. Kerry Martin has been involved since day one of the project. So we're thankful for their partnership. Go to the next. Oh, okay. So last year we completed, we call it phase one of Washington Avenue sidewalks. You all used CDBG funding through our office to complete that phase, and I think it was very successful. I was excited to be able to manage that on behalf of the township and on behalf of Reimagine Washtenaw. Pittsfield Township has invested, and here's some estimates of what you and Pittsfield Township have done over the last 5 or so years using CDBG funding, which is, of course, limited. We look at bus stop improvements at the same time. Let's improve the bus stops, make them better, more accessible as we go along. And we are happy and available to manage this next phase as well, should the township request it. You all know how it looks out there. Actually, we fixed this last year. This is in front of the U-Haul there, I think. So that's what it looked like before. That's kind of what we're dealing with. It's a major undertaking to deal with these sorts of conditions. And just some pictures of the completed project. You all, I'm sure, have seen this and maybe even walked it. So. New bus stop, we got the new shelter, partnered with the ride on that, and they dropped that in there, and it's got the new sidewalk out to the curb. It looks great. So the next phase, this is essentially a map of, you can see Ypsilanti Township, and the city is in blue. Gulfside is, Hewitt is that middle street there in the middle of that image. On the west is Gulfside. Essentially, the yellow areas are the gaps that we have left in Ypsilanti Township to do. It doesn't really show the sidewalks that are out of compliance. So that's why some of these costs have come in higher. It's one of the reasons why they've come in higher than we anticipated. And why we're having this discussion tonight about where to go from here is there is a lot of replacements, sidewalks that are no longer compliant, they've settled, et cetera. So those are not shown. The yellow is literally the gaps where there's no sidewalk at all. But this gives you an idea. At the city border on the south, it splits this strip center, so we'd like to kind of work with the city on going another 200 feet to get it to that next street, ideally, in this next phase. So with this next phase, you would mostly be done. There would still be some, I think, on the north side, some replacement that would be needed at some point. But Ypsilanti Township along Washington Avenue would be mostly done with bringing the sidewalk up to code, completing the network. Again, the city of Ypsilanti coordination would be smart, I think, to Cortland because of the weird boundary that's right in that middle of that strip mall. The ride is committed to a financial contribution to the project because they've got bus stops that will be improved as part of this. And so that's a piece of the funding puzzle, but it's not nearly enough. So to bring us up to today, we did complete the base map and the topographic survey with OHM, your township engineer, and we continue with them because they're your engineer. They're very familiar with the project. They're good engineers. So we utilized the remaining from phase one, 10,000 CDBG funding to do that. So now we're to the point where, okay, how committed are we to this next phase? Where do we go from here? The next phase is about a $70,000 engineering design of this remaining sidewalk infill. From there, we would need to look at easement descriptions and surveys so we can go out and request the easements that we need from the property owners, just like we did in phase one, and get those hopefully voluntarily given to us so we can build the sidewalk. So that's a piece. Easement acquisition will take probably a year at least. To the time it takes to individually contact owners and work with them on getting the easement signed, working out their questions, concerns. And then at this time, assuming 2024 or 25, its construction is estimated between $700,000 and $900,000. There's additional costs for construction engineering by OHM, so another 135 to 170. So you can see the total cost, $920 to $1.2 million, let's call it. So again, I think there's a lot more replacement sidewalk needed than we thought, and these are future dollars. So construction costs are rising, concrete costs are rising. This is what OHM has told us to be conservative, and guess what that might cost. The township receives approximately $175,000 a year in CDBG funding. You're currently in a year of $175,000 in funding for 21-22. So you have the funding to move forward with design if you so choose. But if you look at this year and the next couple of years, we only got about $425 available for construction after spending the design money. And so we have a funding gap of about $500 to $750, let's call it, for 2024 construction, assuming 2024. I didn't want to include any financial contribution from the ride because it's, at this point, again, it's verbal, it's not a hard number. And then the city of Ypsi would chip in, of course, for their section at the city border. So how do we approach it? We could do a segmented approach or phased approach. We could go just to Hewitt and then 1 year and then maybe save up another year or two in CBG funding to continue on. It's not as efficient. There'll be a higher cost because you're breaking it up, but that's one way to look at this if we so choose. And then funding sources, CDBG obviously is the one we've been using, maybe a TAP grant, but we've looked at that before, and this is not regional enough, it's not big enough generally for TAP grants, and they like the easements to already be secured based on what I've heard from the SEMCOG person I talked to. So it may not be the best candidate for TAP, local general fund, your funding, and then federal infrastructure. I put this presentation before the infrastructure bill was passed and signed, so that could be some money that maybe could help at the time that we look to construct this. So I don't need to go through all this. You all understand pedestrian connectivity and safety is key for your community. You've been super committed to Reimagine Washtenaw, been a great partner. We were happy to be doing this on behalf of the township and ready to kind of take the next step, whatever that may be, however you decide to proceed. You can see the challenge of the funding gap anticipated for 3 or 4 years out. So I think there's more discussions to be had, more decisions to make. With that, I do have additional information that the supervisor is well aware of that I wanted to bring up with some meetings that we've had with Representative Peterson yesterday morning. And then one that was 10 days ago. MDOT, we just learned that MDOT is applying through the governor's office for COVID funding to do a reconstruct from Carpenter to the water tower. So it would include this entire area. And that means only the roadway. They're not going to look at everything that we want for Reimagine Washtenaw. It's not that they're not going to look at it. They don't have the funding. They're not going to pay for bike lanes. They're not going to pay for street lights. Not even sure about sidewalks. So that's not, they don't know about that funding yet, but in anticipation of that, with the discussions we've had with MDOT leaders, Supervisor Stumbo, Gray Wall, Francis McMullen was there, Bonnie Wessler from the city, various representatives, senators from the state, EMU was there. There's a new interest in getting everybody together and pushing forward with the larger vision. And what MDOT is willing to do and come back to us yesterday in doing was paying for internally what's called a planning and environmental linkages study. And that is a pre-environmental study that would be required to do the larger 70 or 80 million request that they have of the state, executive request, to do the reconstruct in about 3 or 4 years. The advantage is it allows, they're going to hire a consultant. We would re-engage all the stakeholders, including the 4 communities, the ride. MDOT would lead this process, but there would be stakeholders guiding the process. And it's a chance for them to look at, okay, if we do a reconstruct, what is this going to look like? What does MDOT want to do? What do we want to do? What alternatives do we have to achieve the Reimagine Washtenaw vision? So it's kind of re-looking at our plan now that there's an opportunity for funding. The timing of the funding was perfect for these meetings we had with Representative Peterson. So the one thing that came up yesterday morning was there's a chance that out of that study, which will take a year, so if they hire a consultant in the spring, we're not done till spring of 2023, what could come out of it is an alternative where the sidewalks are torn up. And so what I want to recommend to you, based on the meeting yesterday, is that we wait out the MDOT process a little bit and see where that takes us. And if there's an alternative that comes up that where it's clearly going to be a waste of money to put in sidewalks that'll come out 3 or 4 years later, then let's use your CDBG funding for something else. And let's wait on the sidewalk infill. Let MDOT do it maybe as part of their reconstruct. Maybe we have to come in with supplemental funding. Maybe the infrastructure money can supplement the COVID funding or something in 3 or 4 years. I don't know. But that's my recommendation based on these couple of meetings we've had with the representative and all these other MDOT. The director of MDOT was there, got the director twice to come down from Lansing, which was great, and high up engineers in MDOT. They were all there, and they're willing to proceed with this. And this is a $750,000 to $1 million study. It's not, we only spent on the corridor improvement study $350,000 or $300,000. So this will be a much more comprehensive, detailed look at alternatives, more detailed engineering, right-of-way needs, right-of-way acquisition needs. But we will need to be part of that process to push MDOT to not forget your vision for the corridor, not to forget the coalition's vision for the corridor, which is it's not just going to be a roadway. We want it to be multimodal. We want it to be a lot more placemaking. We want it to be denser at the nodes for more vitality and more energy and more economic activity, et cetera. So we have to be at the table, and they've done this before. This is a new and upcoming thing. I'm excited about it. I think Supervisor Stumbaugh, I don't know how you feel about it. We talked a little bit. So that's kind of where I'm at today. What I would recommend is we wait this out a little bit to see where that process takes us. I think I'm done.
Are there questions regarding the update?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Hey, Nathan, how are you?
I'm great, thanks.
Thanks for coming with this presentation, and I'm glad you gave that little insight there at the end, because at the beginning, prior to your presentation, I went through the presentation on my own, and I was ready to say, let's do it now, But with that little insight there at the end, I appreciate your recommendation, and that makes sense to kind of wait, pause, and see how it all plays out. So thank you for coming.
Pleasure.
Any other Debbie?
Could you give us, just explain when you say a sense of place, what you mean by that?
Well, what I think the vision is that you create more, for example, street activity by bringing the buildings up to the sidewalk. You don't put the parking in the front, you put the parking in the side or the rear. You bring more apartments, mixed-use development in these areas. You add streetlights and streetscape elements that make it more comfortable for pedestrians to walk around. And so there's ground-level retail, ground-level activity, commerce, and it just feels there's more people walking around, there's more people living on the corridor. That's what I mean by sense of place.
They called that form-based, so I'm just trying to make sure I understand the different, like the terminology. So in this reference, that means like what we've heard for what they talked about with form-based.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
Madam Chair. Nathan, I just wanted to thank you for coming tonight. I think, even as being on the board the prior 4 years, it's just really nice to, hear the history of it and get my dates down correctly. And, just thank you for your commitment to this project, and hopefully we'll get it there soon. And I'm excited about the MDOT. That's really exciting. So thank you for participating in that conversation.
Other comments? I was surprised at the meeting that we went to, Nathan, and it was very nice of Representative Ronnie Peterson to bring the director there, and that's the second time he had been in attendance. The city of Ypsilanti, Pittsfield Township, then state senator. There was quite a decision makers or, or influencers. They were around the table. But one question I had too is that they had not passed the infrastructure bill either. And that was just recently passed. So, things are always moving, and if we have an opportunity, we should, capitalize on the opportunities for other funding. I agree with that. I hope they don't tear out what we put in.
Yeah, this was news, I think, all of us.
I was shocked when they said that.
Yeah.
Because they knew that we pulled the permits and everything to do that. But
Yeah, I think with the COVID funding, it was an opportunity, and
yeah,
the state has the funding, so.
Yeah, but what they explained is that if they have to go into our current sidewalks, right? The new ones that we just did?
That's to be determined, right? We don't, we hope not, but
We don't know.
don't know at this
We
point.
don't know, yeah, so. But I think it's great. And form-based, you're right, Debbie, that is the same terminology, and we do it on E-Course Road too. There's not very many vacant parcels, but as we redevelop, I know they tried to get them in Pittsfield Township to bring the buildings up closer, and that's really hard to do, but if we can, that's what we should try to do. And we did pretty good on Hewitt and Washtenaw. They got them closer than what they originally started for that new building that's going up, that's a gas station, so.
That's a start, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're setting the stage.
Yeah.
With having the codes in place, Pittsfield has had it in place for a few years. You're setting the stage, you're making sure that when that comes, when the timing's right, you're going to get the development form that you want.
yes. Oh, sure,
Question?
sure.
So on the page that has the corridor improvement study adoption,
Yeah.
there's the illustration of the future of transit. And so I was wondering, is that just a picture of something like used to illustrate that? Or is that really something where we're thinking like a median like that with greenery in the middle would be part of what we were thinking?
These cross-sections were really carefully considered by all four communities. Ann Arbor has more right-of-way, so they chose a wider median with a Michigan left. The two townships have less right-of-way, so you all looked at this idea of narrower, not a Michigan left, but a landscape median. The most important thing here is this idea of the balance of the different elements of the cross-section and the fact that you've reserved 8 feet for a bike lane. That bike lane ultimately could be off the street and, above the curb. But I think the point is the elements that you have that you're calling for, and then the overall dimension that we need to provide for them. And speaking of the transit, the idea was, okay, and that's why this lower right says future transit. The idea was maybe bus rapid transit, maybe it's running, center running. Maybe is it in the outside lane? Is it a dedicated lane? Is it a mixed traffic lane? We don't know, but we want to acknowledge that that's to be determined, but we want to acknowledge that it's a piece of this plan. We need transit, we need more robust transit. As part of the success of this corridor, we'll be having more and more frequent transit and better transit.
So that gives a good overview. So my concern would be with the zoning that's being redone, they're very carefully trying to make sure that these corridors are, the future is very viable. And so how does that get coordinated so that what we're trying to do with the zoning matches maybe these other goals? Because how does that happen so there's cohesiveness to it? Because that's exactly what we're trying to do with the form base. We're trying to create a more cohesive corridors within our community. But if there's all this stuff that could be at play, that could be problematic if we don't have somebody who's watching over what that looks like and what we're hoping for. So, and with all these other communities, I know the stretch that's in our community is going to be, we'll have a place at the table, but if there's a lot of different people making these decisions, my concern would be that some of the work that we're trying to do to be cohesive can end up not being cohesive, which could be counterproductive to Ypsilanti Township in particular, that's got old sections of development that we're trying to bring forward in a future thinking way.
I think having this plan that's been, if you'll allow me, I don't know if you're looking for a response, but having a plan that you all have adopted was a key piece of what we wanted to make sure that we
That's
had.
a vision, right?
That everybody's adopted, and my role as project manager is to kind of make sure that I'm talking to all the pieces and kind of creating that cohesion. This plan has a cross-section to the foot for a reason, right? So that when, for example, Fresh Time, when you all approve Fresh Time, we got that extra 10 or 12 feet of future right-of-way from them at that time because we knew, because you all had adopted the plan, we knew we needed 10 feet. So that's how that happens, how we set the stage slowly, we put the pieces together, and then at some point when MDOT, and we knew MDOT would come through at some point with a lot of money, and it sounds like maybe they're coming with a lot of money to do the reconstruct, then we know what we're doing. And this Pell study will allow us to sort of check in with this 2014 study that we've adopted, check in with it. Is it still viable? Is it still relevant? Where do we need to update it? Does the vision still, and with the budget that they have and that we have, what can we do? So it's a good opportunity to do that. But I think the study is the key and that you all have adopted it.
I do know at the meeting, they called this a Delta plan, right?
Well, right, Yusuf Rabi was asking about, okay, MDOT's got, let's say, 80 million, but what if it costs twice that to build the vision? So what is that delta?
Yeah.
And I am going to be sitting down with Mike and Carrie to try to pick out those elements that MDOT won't pay for. What will they pay for? And then try to get an idea for what is that delta. And then this Pell study will even flesh that out further, what the difference is.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Nathan,
you.
we contribute, right, to you managing the project as well?
Yeah, right. So initially it was all 4 units were contributing $5,000 a year to kind of support the project management. The ride was contributing $15,000 a year. And I think over time, Brownfields has kind of picked up my time, and Reimagine Washtenaw was more of a lull, so we backed that down to $3,000 a year for the 4 units, and I think the ride, we backed them down to, I think, 9, if I'm remembering right. So you do all, yes, you all support, and financially, for my time to kind of coordinate.
Right.
We appreciate that.
We appreciate
We hope
you.
that you appreciate me, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right. So we'll keep everyone updated as we know about MDOT and they're moving forward. So, thank you. The second item is a AAATA presentation by Matt Carpenter.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Hunter, and I am the representative for the township on the board of the AAATA. And we are here tonight to discuss, we'll hopefully start the conversation for the long-range planning for 2045. They say that the future belongs to those who prepare for it now, so we're hoping to prepare for it now. And this is a great time to start, because this plan is so far in advance that the more you say, the more we can accomplish. So we're hoping to have lots of feedback, have a robust discussion of what could be accomplished and how to go about that. With me tonight are our CEO, Matt Carpenter, and Forrest Gang. So we will begin. And also, I should say, if you ever have questions, I am your representative, so don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan, and good evening, members of the board. My name is Matthew Carpenter. I'm the CEO over at The Ride. It's a pleasure to be here this evening, and I'm excited to sort of walk you through the technical aspects of this. The Ride has been working on developing our new long-range plan now for several months, and I think many of you maybe received some invitations to some earlier stakeholder sessions, and thank you for those of you who were able to participate. We've entered a new stage of our work where we have some exciting sort of technical elements that we want to share with people, really in the interests, as Ryan said, of spurring discussion. There are no decisions this evening. There are no decisions for us anytime soon. What we'll talk about this evening is really ideas that we hope will spur your reactions and get your feedback now and over the next week. So what are we doing? As this slide illustrates, we're developing a longer range plan, specifically by the year 2045, what do we see our public transit services being in this quadrant of Washtenaw County? We're trying to address all of the elements that you see on the right-hand side there. Where do we get the goals for a long-range public transit plan? Really, they derive from our member communities, as represented by folks like Ryan here, bringing the values of our various communities to us. When we looked at the various types of initiatives and plans that we see in the different communities we serve, which are Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, and Ypsilanti Township, of course, we see a lot of common values. We see a lot of things that you all share. Many people are concerned about climate change, social equity, affordable housing, or even just nuts and bolts issues like how to get people to jobs. Basic stuff. And yes, of course, tax rates are also one of those things we see in common across many municipalities. So we derive our goals, what is transit supposed to be accomplishing in 2045, very much from the input we receive from municipalities, and you can see them up there. Increasing social equity, access to jobs, education and housing, helping the environment, reducing air pollution, and supporting workers and businesses. Next slide, please. So our methodology for this plan at this stage is to begin to bring out some initial ideas about how transit could evolve over the next 25 years. What we've been sharing with the communities over the last couple of weeks has been 4 options, and these options, sort of scenarios we call them, are hypothetical. I would characterize them as straw men. I very much doubt whatever final solution we come to over the next 6, 12 months is going to be one of these. I suspect it's going to look very different than anything that's on the board today. But these are useful because they represent an increasing level of investment, an increasing amount of ridership and development of the transit services. And we use these to sort of take the temperature of the various communities we talk to. How much is enough? How much is too much? What do you think about the various tax rates, for example, that are assigned to these scenarios? So there's no right or wrong about any of these things. It's very early in the process, and all feedback is welcome this evening. So with that, I'll walk you through very quickly some of the technical issues behind these scenarios and how we're conceiving of the evolution of the transit system over the next few decades. So unfortunately, this one, the titles are not showing up, but this is scenario 1, our baseline scenario. This represents a kind of do-nothing option, and as any good planner will tell you, you want to sort of be able to say, if we don't do anything, what does that look like? Now, we are judging our success primarily on ridership. How many people are using the various services that we provide? That drives a lot of things like how useful are we from an environmental perspective, from access to jobs. Well, if there are a lot of people riding it, we can make I think, reasonable, informed choice that perhaps it's doing better. In this scenario, doing nothing means, frankly, minimal or no increase to our local mill rate that we levy in our various communities. And our services, get a little bit better as we get more efficient, but roughly they hit a wall at some point. And population growth begins to outpace the ability of the system to attract more riders. So the population of our various areas will now will grow faster, 1% to 2% a year, than the transit system can accommodate. So our ridership per capita or per population begins to fall behind. This is the reality of minimal investment, is that we will only be able to have the amount of impact we make today, and we can't really expand much further than that. Nevertheless, Nevertheless, you can see here, we try to quantify things as best as we can. 63% of the population of our area is within a pretty close walk, 15 minutes, of what we call high-frequency services. The green area on this map is roughly our service area, and the blue lines are the routes today that have what we characterize as high-frequency service. Next one. I don't know where my titles went. I seem to have lost them in transit somewhere, but this is option 2, scenario 2. This sees an increasing level of investment in the public transit system, a small increase to our local millage. What we're able to do with that is increase the amount of services that we offer. You would see more blue lines on this map, and you start to see the introduction of some of these dark blue lines. These are new express services intended to move people more quickly from point to point across the area. And you can see here that because of the expansion of the service, now 77% of the population is within a close walk to higher frequency transit. That matters because the frequency of transit is really what determines how attractive it is and its ability to attract new riders. One word here as we shift to the next slide, though I do have some maps that just focus in on the township, and we'll get to those in just a moment. All my titles seem to have evaporated. This is a slide that illustrates some of the new tactics that begin to show up in some of these scenarios, beginning in scenario 2 and increasing as we go on. The idea of transit priority, and Nathan was speaking, I think, to some similar elements here of bus rapid transit, the ability of public transit to move quickly in spite of traffic congestion can include a lot of different tactics. Some of them are very minor, like tweaking the traffic signals to allow buses some priority. Others are much more direct, like bus lanes, similar to bike lanes. These are the sorts of high-impact things that we only do in very congested bottlenecks where the density of bus traffic really warrants an expensive treatment like this. Next slide, please. This is scenario 3. In this scenario, we see a larger increase to the millage, a corresponding heavier increase in the amount of transit services. What starts to happen here is that the service and the ridership it generates begin to grow faster than the population. So that 1% to 2% population growth, we begin to nudge ahead of that. That's significant because of what it means is that we're able to do more benefit for more people relatively, even as our communities grow and change. So this is the first one where we really begin to make progress on a lot of the aspirations we see communities expressing, like major impacts to increasing ridership, economic mobility, labor force participation, labor mobility, climate change, climate action, those sorts of things. What we see here is the introduction, more blue lines, more frequent services expanding into new areas, and the introduction of bus rapid transit on Washtenaw Avenue. This is where we tie into what Nathan was just talking about. In this scenario, bus rapid transit, which I'll speak about in a moment, is what we call BRT Light, because it's introduced with many attributes, but not a dedicated lane. That could come later. So that's what we see here. Nevertheless, you see 86% of the population in this scenario is within a close walk to a high-frequency service. Bus rapid transit, as Nathan was describing, is the concept of what we call train on tires. The idea here is to simulate the kind of rapid transit, high-frequency service that you might get on a subway or a light rail line, but frankly, to do it at a much lower cost, using vehicles that are smaller, more affordable, and running ways, rights of way, that we already own, i.e. the streets themselves. This can come in 2 flavors, like I say. Full BRT usually has some sort of dedicated road or dedicated right-of-way that comes along with it. BRT Light does not, and it operates in mixed traffic like buses do today. Our final scenario, scenario 4, introduces even more services, a correspondingly higher increase in the millage, yes, but we see a more aggressive expansion of the light blue lines, the BRT lines, which now include through routing through the city of Ann Arbor, as well as a north to south line in the city of Ann Arbor. We also see, if you look, you can see a dark blue line moving from the city of Ypsilanti around I-94 to the far west side of Ann Arbor. The idea there is to reduce travel times for people going from the east side of county to the west side of Ann Arbor without having to have them go through downtown Ann Arbor. At this point, you can see 93% of the population of our areas are within a very close walk to a high-frequency transit service. So there we go. Okay. So some of the feedback we got about these maps earlier was that they didn't really focus on the township and the east side of the county. So we added this slide to try to really emphasize this. So you can see scenarios 1, 2, 3, and 4 here, a little bit more focused on the township and the East Ypsilanti, greater Ypsilanti area. You can see in scenario 1, which is basically what we have today, pretty good service by and large, but you see it increase in scenario 2 with the expansion of the dark blue line being an express route into downtown Ann Arbor. Scenario 3, you see those blue lines really start to expand. We're not trying to follow specific roads at this point. We're much too early in the process, so these are general lines indicating the direction of these higher frequency services. And then you can see in scenario 4, even more of them heading down towards Rawsonville and Route 3 that heads up actually to St. Joseph Hospital on the north side of town. So a great expansion here on the eastern side of the county. We are trying to be as quantitative and factual with these scenarios as we can. That really helps you guys give us feedback about the various pros and cons, what you like and what you don't like about these various scenarios for our fixed route service. We can see across the top row that the sort of less tangible items, the environmental, economic, and social sustainability elements increase with the amount of investment. That's really driven by the amount of ridership that we are suddenly able to carry with that increased investment and how much more attractive the service is, frankly. You can see the next line is the overall service increase. With option 4, we get to 100%, which means effectively we've doubled the size of the service that we provide, which would be a pretty ambitious thing to do in 25 years, but actually we've already done that once before. Over the last 50 years or so, we've doubled like that as well. But we also want to be clear about the costs, because it's an important side of this, and we really need to judge not only what people want, but what we're willing to pay for as a community and as communities. So we're representing the range of mill rates. It's hard to be precise 25 years out, but these generally outline the range of mill rates that could be necessary to fund a service like this. Now, those 4 options really have to be kind of decided about the fixed route service. We'll come back to them in a little bit. But there are several other elements of this plan that could kind of happen independently of any of those 4 scenarios, a la carte, if you will. There's a lot of other elements in our plan that we're asking for feedback on. Our paratransit services and door-to-door service for persons with disabilities. We have some options in there we're interested in people's feedback on. Our agency's involvement in land use, for example, on the Washtenaw Avenue corridor and how transit-oriented development might begin to occur. New mobility and emerging technologies, there's a lot of exciting things happening with new technologies these days. How much should we get involved in that as an agency? And then, of course, collaborations with some of our major institutional partners are also addressed. There is one other element of these other services that we have to sort of carve off and discuss separately because it's an independent decision. And it relates to park and ride services further away from the core of our urban area. For many years, the ride has operated a number of small park and ride lots, either by owning them or leasing the space around and within our existing service area. But given the aspirations for intercepting a lot of the incoming work traffic that's coming into Ann Arbor in particular, we're proposing that what we should consider possibly is a second ring of park and ride lots much further away from the Ann Arbor freeway ring. This does affect the township in so much that you can see the light blue lines there. We are building in some assumptions for the future about where similar services for the Ypsilanti, greater Ypsilanti area might need to radiate out as well. So what you can see in those light blue lines are assumptions in our plans about services from Ypsilanti to Detroit Metro Airport and then on to downtown Detroit, and then possibly something up to, in this map it looks like Canton, but it's actually just sort of western Wayne County and very much a jobs connection option. So those are a different set of decisions that we're also asking for feedback on. In closing, just to begin wrapping it up, we're asking the public and stakeholders throughout the community a lot of the same questions we're here today to ask you. What do you think about these various scenarios? Are there things you like about one option or dislike? Would you like to see them combined in a different way? Frankly, what are your thoughts on pay and willingness to pay? What's the right balance between what our community aspires to and what we, frankly, are willing to pay for? Because this is a real consideration. And as we set our sights for 25 years, we want to make sure it represents the genuine interests of this community and all the communities we serve. We have been doing public involvement now for about a month. I think we have another week to go. We've, I think, hosted all of our public meetings. But we still have an online presence. We're still doing up a few meetings like this, and we still have an online survey, and we would very much like to hear as much as we can from folks here in the township, starting this evening with you. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd love to hear any reactions or responses that you may have.
All right. Questions or comments?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Trustee Wilson.
A lot of times on the in the news we hear more about the three larger counties in southeast Michigan when in regards to regional transit. And then this may be kind of a side topic, I guess, but how involved are you with those discussions here in Washtenaw County with them to try to bring that to Washtenaw County also and combine the four counties with regional transit?
So thank you for the question. Excellent question. It does affect some elements of this plan. Washtenaw County is and has been a member of the Regional Transit Authority since it was formed in about 2013. There are 2 Washtenaw County representatives appointed by the County Board of Commissioners to sit on that body. But you are correct that, frankly, the main event is the 3-county area, and Washtenaw County is sort of off to the side. We speak to RTA staff, I would say, on a weekly basis. I was speaking to their lead planner just yesterday. We try to do our best to represent the communities that we serve, who are members of the authority, and the interests that we believe everyone has. But we also try to respect the role of the RTA representatives who actually do represent the entire county. So we have a lot in common with them. And what we've discussed informally, well, not formally, with the RTA is some elements of this plan, like that second ring of park and ride lots and those regional connections out to Detroit from the Ypsilanti area, for example. We're not sure at this point whether that's our job or the RTA's job, and frankly, who should pay for it. We figure, for starters, let's just have a conversation with our residents about what you want. And once we figure that out, then we'll arm wrestle with the RTA over who gets to operate what and how it gets paid for. But it starts with, what do you want?
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Other questions or comments? Trustee Newman?
This is part of the PAG engagement, which had a few meetings throughout the months of the parking, of the 2045 proposal to ride. And I was just saying that to say I was part of those groups. And a few of the concerns stemmed around the reliability and the flexibility, because there were some people that had different working hours, and they wanted to make sure that the ride would be reliable. And for some of the concerns was around people that were disabled. And also, I think because of the sidewalk issues being taken care of, in the wintertime, a lot of times when you're on the street waiting on a bus, it's not really safe because the sidewalks are full of snow. So I think one of the concerns was, in this day and age of Lyft and what's the other one? Lyft and
Uber.
you know, how can our young people be assured that the bus would be as competitive and as reliable as a Lyft, because those take you right to the front door. And those were some of the concerns I was just, you know, expressing, not to, you know, rain on your parade or be devil's advocate.
No, those are excellent comments, and they are addressed in various areas, and I'll maybe just touch on a few of them. With respect to Uber and Lyft, you may know that we operate what we call a flex ride service, actually very commonly here in Ypsilanti Township, south of the freeway. And it's been, I'll be honest with you, much more successful than I initially expected in terms of competing with Uber and Lyft, taking people door to door. It's been more successful than I expected. It's served very well in a sort of cost-effective way to do it. I think the main difference between those services provided by us and serviced by Uber and Lyft is frankly stability. Uber and Lyft are heavily subsidized by venture capitalists right now, trying to get market share, trying to be the biggest. If they ever decide that their business model doesn't work, that they can't actually make a profit, those services will just disappear with no notice to you, no discussion to your residents, just gone. That's the pros and cons of the private market, right? You can get great innovation and good stuff, but if it doesn't make enough money, it can disappear. Our stability and commitment to you is a bit more reliable, and it's, in fact, based on property taxes, which is how we are funded. And with agreements with bodies like yours, we can make those sorts of things happen. In terms of flexibility, all of these scenarios do see expansion in what we call the hours of operation, the days of the week. So being able to start earlier, run later in the evening is something we've heard. So all of them incorporate that to some degree. Reliability in terms of on-time performance is also something we continue to work on now, but is something that can be enhanced with things like bus lanes, queue jumpers, traffic signal priority. Again, costs that can be incurred, but can help us stay on time, regardless of the traffic conditions. And then snow clearing, just as a northern climate, and I'm sure the weather outside didn't trigger you at all with that comment. It's an annual struggle. We have great relationships with a lot of commercial properties who shovel the snow for us. We shovel as much of it as we can, but when it really comes down, ultimately we do lean on the municipal groups who are responsible for snow clearing of sidewalks, and there's a bunch of different ways that it's done, and frankly to different levels throughout our service area. So it may seem a little inconsistent, but it kind of depends on where you live.
Because I do think that there is a market for a ride, given the cost of gas and insurance, and just the fact that a lot of people aren't really concerned about driving. But as long as those factors are addressed, I think people would be interested.
Thank you.
Yes, Trustee Swanson.
Thank you for the presentation. We've been spending a lot as a township board thinking about the opportunity index and the data and what that's going to mean for our citizens. When I look at the maps, I don't see, and public transportation is a vital part of that happening in our community, but when I look at the maps, and maybe it's just the way they're pictured, I don't see the strongest path for what I would say are the areas that we need to be most concerned about. So they're not the dark blue lines. They're not the red lines. And so you can see red line, which is very interesting. I don't know if I would use that color, but that would be a concern just when you're looking at the map. So when I look at this with the eyes of, and people need to know that the city of Ypsilanti, it's our community, we're connected to each other, but it's not Ypsilanti Township. So when you look at it, and I can see it looks very centralized on the needs of the city. And I'm not saying that that's not a good thing. I'm just saying when I look at it and I see the township, I'm not seeing what I would need to see, even in the most expensive plan here, for what our residents are going to need, especially in the Opportunity Index. So when I look at like the regional one, what that looks like to me is that there's a great desire to get Ann Arbor wherever Ann Arbor wants to go back and forth. And there's a desire just to get Ypsilanti to Ann Arbor or to get them to Detroit and to get them right back home, really. It doesn't look like the design of this is for our residents, or the citizens in Ypsilanti greater, to be, to have the dignity of transportation. It looks like we're there to serve the purposes of other entities. And that feels unfair, and it feels like it doesn't necessarily address the equity, which was right at the front. And again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I appreciate they're here, but I'm just honestly, when I looked at it, this is what I thought. It doesn't reach the areas of the township that need the dignity of transportation. This isn't about whether somebody wants to go net zero and not drive their car. This is about whether someone has the ability to get to work because they don't have the transportation to get there to take care of their family. And so I appreciate the big picture, but I look at the money and I'm thinking, even that big lift, if we were to all say, oh, and I'm not saying this, we're all in for how much money that's going to cost. Even if we did that, it wouldn't be enough to uplift our residents to the level that they need to be uplifted, that they deserve to be uplifted, that all of, we say this in Washtenaw County, but I don't see it. And so I can understand, you got to look at institutions, you got to look at where they came from. AATA was designed to take care of Ann Arbor. And as it expanded out, it's an institution. It's got systemic things that it was designed to do. But the maps look like it's not built or designed to take care of our needs. And I'm not saying that people did that on purpose or that's the way it's designed, but when you look at the map and you look at the hub, and Ann Arbor's the center of the hub, like what does that mean for somebody who in Ypsilanti maybe wants to work in Northville? They got to go all the way down to Ann Arbor to get maybe somewhere else where they'd want to go. I don't know if that's like equity. So my concern would be just that as we look at what people need, we need to be overlapping that with the Opportunity Index, and we need to understand that it is the dignity of transportation. It's not, like John said, they can't wait to get to work that long. They got to be there. Their lives, their families, it depends on that. Their ability to have opportunity and get out is going to be heavily impacted by the transportation that we can help provide as a community, as a greater community, like as a county, for that to happen. So it's not about whether somebody wants to go, down to Detroit and they don't want to drive their car to a Tiger game. That's great. Our residents may want that. This is really about people getting to work. And I know, like the back part, like what I don't see is like the ways that, like it looks like everybody's got to get there just one straight way out of Ypsilanti. Like if you're trying, even myself, if I try to get from the far east side of Ypsilanti to Ann Arbor, I don't go Washtenaw. I go the back way around, like Getty's and that way around, because you can get there quicker, you can get there more efficiently than you might be able to do if you're just going straight up Washtenaw. So I don't want to be a downer, but I know that the whole entire township board is committed to the idea that if we have data that says that people need to be uplifted and helped, as a board, township board, we're committed towards that end. And so transportation's got to fit, everything's got to fit, because that's the lens we're looking for right now, because our residents are relying on us to be the people who will advocate for that. So thank you.
And thank you for that. If I could ask the assistant, could you go back to the slide that has the 4 maps? It might be maybe the 5th one back. And I want to thank Trustee Swanson for raising that, and it certainly echoes things we've heard from the township before in terms of focus on practical needs, focus on what people need in their lives, maybe not some of the more aspirational goals that we sometimes hear from other municipalities. But I would like, this is not the first time I've actually bumped into an opinion similar to this in terms of a sensation maybe that these proposals don't seem to do much for the eastern side of the township. And you gave a few examples, but I'm wondering, Trustee Swanson, if you might elaborate on what's missing. Because you mentioned having to go into Ann Arbor to get to Northfield. You mentioned faster
with your
connection
parking.
from,
Yeah, that was with your park and ride, so, but when I look at the ones, the 1, 2, 3, 4,
I was asking her to go one more slide, maybe. And this slide always stalls because it's memory heavy. There we are.
yeah. So the areas in our opportunity index that would need to get to work quickly are the farthest. So there, you have like past, like where you have that lighter blue line, but that isn't going to be as efficient as like the darker one. And then, you know, a lot of our community members work at the universities, they work at the hospital, they work at places where parking costs a lot. And so that high-frequency service, I don't know that that's the kind of service that's fast enough to get people efficiently like where they've got to go.
So it's end-to-end travel time.
They wait a little bit, so it looks like, and then the other thing that doesn't make sense is we've got this very congested transit station in downtown Ypsilanti where it's hard to turn. You've got a lot of people pooling there, and so most of our people, they have to get there to kind of transfer other places. So that's going to take them a longer time to get wherever they're going to be. So I realized we had to build it kind of as it was going to build. But if we're going to get even more, we're going to have more routes, we're going to get more riderships. I question whether that's going to meet the needs of people. And again, it's always you got to get from where you are, which is, you know, if you're coming from West Willow or you're coming from Apple Ridge, or you're coming from over by where Holmes Road, over by the old, like where the Willow Run complex is, Sugarbrook, you've got to wait. And so,
Is it the waiting for the bus or the travel time once you get picked up to where you're going? If you had to pick one that was more important.
I think that people have to have an efficient way to get wherever their employer's going to be. And I don't know that there's a greater sense when you look at these lines that that's a priority. Like if you look at one, that doesn't look like anybody in our opportunity index is going to be a priority. If you look at 2, we still haven't gotten into it. So if we're thinking we're going to do anything that's going to help our opportunity index, we're looking at 3 or 4 at this point.
Okay, so your focus is kind of on the east side of the township. Okay.
That's where our strongest opportunity.
We love the opportunity index. It is a tool we refer to many times. So I'm just sort of confirming with you. And I appreciate you helping unpack, because we hear very frequently, it needs to be more efficient. We always try to push a little and ask, well, what does efficiency mean to you? Because it seems to mean different things to different people. For some folks, it means I want to not have to look at the timetable so I can be kind of flexible in when I leave. If I have to leave because the bus only comes once an hour, for example, that's not very efficient use of my time. So if I can just walk out and the bus will come every 10 minutes, that's a lot easier for me. I can be more flexible. And that is efficient from that point of view. But I think I heard you maybe say that, but I'm pretty sure I also said getting to a job fast was maybe even more impossible.
Because, you know, a lot of people, many people, I don't want to make assumptions, but if you're in the opportunity zone, you're probably working somewhere where, you know, you may have to punch a clock, you have, like, your ability to be somewhere where you need to be without, you know, sitting, like, the dignity of having a job where you have the luxury of being able to be with your family and other things. Like, we don't want people, like, we want them to get to work. We want them to be able to come home from work, but we want them to have a life and everything else that goes with the ability to have, you're not sitting around waiting on a bus. So, and maybe reliability is what I'm talking about too. Again, AATA is a strong, I'm not saying like the people who are driving the bus, I know people are doing what they need to do. They're a strong member of our collective resources in our community. But when we start to get farther away from downtown city proper, I don't know that everybody has the same ability to use transportation. I'm not sure the right term because I'm not a transportation person, to use it as a vehicle to uplift themselves from whatever situation they are. And because you have to, if anybody who's going to work, if you've got a car, you have more control over your destiny. And so that's what I guess I'm hoping, that people would have more control over or more efficacy in their ability to use public transportation, to have the just even the worry that would come away from being able to know that you can get yourself somewhere reliably and efficiently in a way that's not going to use up and consume what might be your other right to life and time, right? Like, we want public transportation to be something that really, when I say the dignity of transportation, I mean it. I want them to be able to have the dignity of transportation. It's not a gift to the community. I mean, it's the ability to do what you need to do, and it's the ability for, the businesses to know that their workers are going to be able to get there. I mean, it's just a collective community well-being to know that we have the ability to transport people and move people around cleanly. All that's important, but it's about the human infrastructure that we have that needs to be cared for.
Thank you so much for elaborating. I really appreciate that. There was a lot in there that I think is very important. And one of the things I took away is more emphasis on the opportunity zones on the eastern side of the township. So thank you for that. And just before any other questions, one thing I do want to note about the arrangement of these lines, and this goes the same for Ann Arbor. This is what we call a hub and spoke network. Most bus systems in communities of our size, and by that I mean Washtenaw County, operate on a hub and spoke system. It's just a very efficient way to get large numbers of people to be able to access any point on the network. It is not the same. It is inherently different than what we can do with our personal cars. Those are point-to-point services where you can come and go anytime to get to any destination on a network or off. As long as it's got a road, you can get there. Mass transit operates on different principles. And so what we see in here is an evolution from a very strict hub and spoke system, which is what we have today. And you can't see all the routes in option one, but they do radiate out onto the east side of the county, out to West Willow. We have service there today. But by the time we get to option 4, we're trying to get to be more of a grid service where people don't have to go into downtown, so they can transfer on the street corner from route to route. That's only possible when the bus is coming frequently enough that you don't have to stand on the side of the road for half an hour. Nobody wants to do that. So I think we're talking about some of the same issues. We're approaching it in a somewhat planner ease kind of way, but I really appreciate your feedbacks, particularly the emphasis on the eastern side of the township. Thank you.
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Do you have a hub and spoke existing right now? Isn't there one on Plymouth Road right before you get on 23?
That's a park and ride lot.
That's a park and ride.
We have two park and ride lots on the freeway ring around Ann Arbor that are purpose-built. They only serve us. But then there are small parking lots that we've rented from local retailers and commercial properties, all scattered throughout the network in a variety of places.
Okay, so is it just free parking? You don't charge for that parking at all?
We do not charge for the
How
park
often
and
do
ride lots.
those buses go through there?
I think in rush hour, probably every 15 minutes,
Every 15 minutes?
something like that.
And I do agree because, sure, I would love to see this happen in Ypsilanti Township. I look again, and I think it says 2025 or something. But one of the main problems is, and like Debbie said, I think we have to concentrate in Ypsilanti Township. I see you want to span out further. There's so many people try to get at U of M and get at U of M St. Joe on time. And the traffic situation, and this helps if you have a space where you could park, get on that bus. And the thing that has to be corrected is how much time it's going to take. I mean, 30 minutes to do express, hopefully, to get there, not to wait outside, 45 minutes, you're stopping here. It's been a long time since I took I'm from Ann Arbor area, a bus. But to get there directly, that would be a big plus, big plus. And I see you want to expand to these other regional connections, but to concentrate on Ypsilanti Township, Ypsilanti City, our surrounding area, I think, we would love to see this, but it to be expressed. This would be so helpful to people to be able to park and to ride to work, get there on time and efficient. So looking forward to see what happens with this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comment?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Matt, thank you for coming. I know that you've already heard most of my comments, but Trustee Swanson, brought up the Opportunity Index, which we spoke about a couple weeks ago when we talked. And the biggest thing for me is that when you look at these 4 maps here that now detail out a little bit better Ypsilanti Township, a little bit, thank you, is that we have to compare those to the millage rates that you've listed out, right? And this year we had a special election, as you know, and we wrung our budget to see how we could not increase our residents' tax dollars, because we don't want to do that. And so if you look at the millage rates, which is actually the next slide, Lisa, if you don't mind. And Forrest, don't tell me if I'm wrong, but I remember when we discussed this before, for the 2045 additional local millage operations, that's in addition to the 7/10 that we currently have. So that's all of those numbers they're in addition. So for the most bang for our buck in the Ypsilanti Township, or where we actually see some change on those maps, you're looking at options 3 or 4, which could be upwards of, I think the max of that would be 3.8. Right now, 7/10 is what we voted on, and it's a little bit less than that. It's 0.686200 right now with the Headley rollback. But that's a lot of money for our taxpayers, and I think that's my biggest concern. We would love to see more access and more opportunity for people, especially in the high opportunity index areas, to have access and dignity to get on time, even when it snows, down to U of M to have a good job. But, I just can't in my heart say that, the right thing for our residents here in the township are to increase our taxes. So that's my biggest concern with this. Thank you.
And thank you. It's important for us to hear these things because you may be surprised to hear that when I'm in Ann Arbor, there seems to be less concern about property tax rates. I know that's shocking. Hold your gasps. And if I might just burrow into that question a little bit. Is your preferred mill rate no higher than what we do today? Because I want to make sure I interpret it correctly. Is there no amount of additional investment in your mind that's worth it, or is it?
I know. Thank you.
Oh, I'm not trying to trick
No,
anybody.
no.
I'm genuinely trying
It's,
to make sure I calibrate from all the different people we hear. Where is the sweet spot? Because we hear a lot from very vocal people who want everything. I really appreciate coming here because you guys are pretty practical. And I appreciate that.
So I guess.
I do want to just sort of ask, is where we are now kind of as much as you think the taxpayers here
Sure.
can absorb? You're much closer to them than we are.
So I guess I would say that I need a little more information about your total budget. And I would also ask if you know what our taxable value is today in Ypsilanti Township.
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head. But one of the realities of this graph, and part of the reason we put this together without anybody asking, is the sticker shock. And I don't want to sugarcoat that for you or for Ann Arbor or for Ypsilanti. We want to be right up front with it. Because it's easy for us to say, we'll give you everything, and then the money conversation comes later, right? Or not at all. We want to be right up front and try to find out where people's willingness is to pay. Public transit is an expensive service. I don't want to sugarcoat that for anybody here in the room. Our budget right now, our operating budget is $50 million. That's normal. We're not particularly, we're not wasteful, we're not profligate. I actually am pretty proud that we run a fairly tight ship by transit industry standards. But the reality is, it's a labor-intensive service. I have about 250 staff. It's a capital-intensive service. Every bus costs just over $500,000. It has to last 12 years, don't get me wrong. But I don't want to sugarcoat the costs for these sorts of things. So this is not a cheap enterprise for communities to get into. We want to be right up front with that as we ask you these questions.
Sure. All right.
Thank you. Other comments?
So the only thing that goes along with what Trustee Gerald Rowe has said is that it's important to know that the area that our opportunity index zone, like the areas that are showing up the highest, they also bear the largest millage rate because of school debt. So as we're trying to balance things, when the school's consolidated, there's a difference. So that's another concern, right?
So there's a lingering debt from that consolidation
Yes,
in the east side?
So they pay
Okay.
significantly more. So the areas that we mentioned, I mean, we're concerned about everybody, but we really have to be careful because they already have, so in some areas where there's the greatest need for transportation, they're already taxed very heavily.
Thank you for that. That's an excellent point that I'll be honest, probably slipped my mind. So thank you for pointing that out. One question your leadership asked when we met with them a little while ago was, does the federal infrastructure bill have an effect on us? And the answer is maybe. We'll find out, like with a lot of things. From what we can tell, it does primarily focus on capital funding, so construction, purchase of large equipment, things like that. There are no operating, unfortunately. But that does give us some possibility that perhaps we could I want to say front load the capital costs because the feds pay for at least 50% of that in good times. We might be able to do those sorts of things by way of maximizing our budget, leveraging as much federal and state dollars as we can, and try to get some of the capital benefits, which we don't have to do a mill rate for. I think that's the important thing for this discussion. So that is something based on the earlier conversations that we will certainly consider.
I just have a few comments since everyone's talked, but a lot of the comments you're hearing, Matt and Ryan, is what Stan and Heather and I said, and so it's nice to hear it again, especially regarding the opportunity index, but just the increase in taxes alone, because that does affect affordability too. Mm-hmm. Because when we talk about taxpayers, you're talking about businesses as well as apartment complexes. And when you increase it, then they increase their rental rate. I mean, it's just a hamster in a wheel. On your capital costs, there's no operational cost increase in any of these scenarios. Does that include operational?
It will include a mixture, but that's trying to be specific about the capital costs implied by the higher level of service in each scenario. So when we start getting into BRT, for example, that I think in option 3, Forrest, is that right, option 3 for BRT light?
Well, I guess my point is that you really don't have a complete financial picture because you don't have the operational increase.
It's there, but it's not, I can't disaggregate it for you right here. Okay. So for example, our garage, and we have a garage in Ann Arbor, holds about 100 buses. We have about 100 buses. The garage is full. I will not be able to expand our services without building another facility.
So that's a capital, but
so that's capital, and it's baked into these numbers. As soon as the fleet grows, my board is very aware, because I harp on this, I need a place to put those buses, and I can't buy those buses until the building is finished. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg sort of scenario. So they are in there. The operational costs of that building are, in terms of utilities, staffing, insurance, all those things are baked in to the operating cost side of it, but admittedly, this table is not detailed enough to break all of those things out. What we're trying to do at this point is just get a broad picture, what our communities want. Do you want us to lean this way or lean a little bit this way? And once we figure that out, then we'll sort of go down the rabbit hole and burrow into those details.
So if I read your chart, there's a 2045 additional local millage for operations. Is that strictly for operations? Then in addition to that, you have the capital? Are
Those are separate right now, is my understanding, is that the millage is strictly for operations. Capital would be funded by other sources, presumably federal. In our rolling 10-year capital plan, we do identify, sort of the stuff we can pay for and the stuff that frankly is going to have to wait until we can find a way to pay for it, and that's in our public documents. Capital cost, we do have a small capital reserve right now that we can use to leverage some capital funding.
That's fine. I was just trying to understand the actual operation, the long-term operational cost of the different scenarios. And if I look at it correctly, the millage increase is just for the operations.
Yes, and any costs for some of the capital are baked into the millage. So the cost to staff that new garage is captured in the mill rate.
Okay.
So we've done that in the back,
Okay.
behind this table, I guess I should say.
And you probably have that information somewhere, right, to see how much it would,
Oh, yes.
I also am worried about RTA, Jimmy. They say don't think about RTA, but that's a whole nother millage that could come to our community, which would affect everything that we've talked about before. So RTA is going to be going out for another millage, is my understanding. Is that correct? That's what I heard.
That is their mission. I can't speak to their decisions. What I can tell you right now, just based on being closer in proximity to them and talking to them a lot, they are updating their long-range plan right now as well. It's much less detailed than ours, and it's unknown at this point whether or not they would be in a position to go to the voters in 2022 or not. By law, they can only go in even-numbered years and only in November. So if they miss their 2022 window, the soonest you could expect to see them would be 2024.
Is that the same for the AAA?
No, we're on a 5-year cycle. By our enabling legislation is different.
But if you go for an increase, could you go sooner?
So like everyone, we have the same millage laws that I think you do in many respects. So if we had a 5-year millage, as we do now, and we wanted to renew it, which is what we did in 2018, we renewed our millage at the same rate. It was a renew and restore millage. If we wanted to suddenly in year 3 put a ballot proposal out there that says, 1.5 mil, I'm just pulling something out of the air, 1.5 mil to replace the existing one. I believe we could do that in the middle of our 5-year cycle, but that would just start a new 5-year cycle.
Right.
We can never go more than 5 years.
Okay.
RTA actually has a 20-year window.
Okay, and when we, just for history, because you weren't here either, when we joined this, and it was debated when we did it, one of the biggest benefits was that our seniors could ride. So if you were in a 1-mile radius of an existing route, then the ride would come and get them and take them, which was like huge for our community. And that was my selling point, and I think Karen Lovejoy Rose as well. At least that's as you age in place, those are the things that we thought that would be helpful to the community with our senior citizen population, and we don't do that any longer. So that's changed. I got a call today from a lady, she was 95. She lives on Holmes Road, near Holmes Road, Red Leaf Lane, and she wanted to get to the community center. And we ended that route to the community center. That was one of the changes that occurred, remember? And And none of these plans have you going to the community center for the future either. So I just wanted, that happened today. I'm not making this up. So that, again, is not servicing our residents, like the needs of our residents. And I think, I don't know if it's because we're a township and we're, more spread out than urban city like Ann Arbor and like the city of Ypsilanti. I think that might be part of your, what'd you call it? Hub and spoke. That's hard to do when you have such a large area with not a lot of houses. You can go a while before you get to another subdivision. So it's hard to have enough stops there to do that.
Yes.
Anyway, that's what I think. I'm not sure. I'm not in this business either. And I don't think the increase will service the needs of our community. I don't think it's frequent enough. I don't think it goes into enough of the subdivisions to pick them up. And so I'm very concerned, although transportation in your mind sounds great, and it was to get people. There's over 7,000 people from 48197, 48198 that works at U of M. And that was 4 years ago. So it might be more. I'm not sure. But so one of another driving force was to try to get our, the workers to U of M. Mm-hmm. And then downtown Ann Arbor, a lot of our residents were working in the restaurants. And they could not it didn't fit their schedule, right. And that was a challenge. And I'm not blaming anyone. These are just facts that occurred and that came out. So it's a lot of money to try to see if we can lift people up and just help, have an option if your car breaks down. I mean, that could happen in anyone's house, right? And how do you do that? And I'm not sure if all these options are frequent enough to really help. That's, without having more detail, because just having a line going out to West Willow and a line going out, towards, it didn't even go towards Apple Ridge, I don't think, because it missed a community center, which is on Clark Road. So, I guess more detail would be helpful, but my initial reaction is the same that we had before, is just a lot of money to ask and for the services we're getting. Doug, did you want to say?
I said a question, and only because it goes back to 2013, 2014, when the township, as Brenda indicated, we spent an awful lot of time negotiating the transportation funding agreement. And I'm assuming that's still in effect. And if I am reading that agreement today, as I did back in 2013, there was a number of requirements of the ATA at the time the township joined this, which required coming to the board to have budgetary issues, route issues, audit issues. There were a number of things into that agreement that are still, I think, actually binding today. And I'm only raising that question because sometimes we're very, very good at crafting agreements, and maybe not so good sometimes making sure that later on they don't just kind of fall by the wayside. And I would just ask right now that that back then it was Jerry Lax who I negotiated this contract with, and I'm sure Jerry's still practicing law or not. But I would be kind of curious to know whether or not that agreement that we did 8 years ago, if it's still considered to be in compliance with what the last number of years, because I can't recall too many meetings that I missed at all where any day I can recall discussing audit or budgets.
Sure.
And things of that nature that were set forth in that agreement. Again, I think the agreement itself is very, very well put together. Not because I was involved with this, because it was a good agreement among everybody involved at the city,
right.
of Ypsi, Ann Arbor city attorneys, the authority attorneys, and myself. There's a lot of time went into that, into that agreement. And I'm not really sure right now that I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that we do have an agreement in place, and this needs right now for us to make sure that we're checking off those boxes each year in regards to the audits, the budgets, and the township's input by joining that authority. That was a quid pro quo, so to speak.
Excellent question. The funding agreement is still in effect. It did not have a sunset agreement. Ryan actually encouraged us to have a relook at that recently for all of our municipal partners. So I can tell you we have looked at it recently. I believe we are in compliance. The most interesting point of that agreement is point 5, which encumbers us to consult with your board on major policy decisions.
I'm just looking at it right now, that's why.
And that one's actually the one that, we try to err on the side of caution. Major policy decision is not defined in that clause. What is a major policy decision? This strikes me as a major policy decision, which is why we're here. So in terms of compliance, we reached out to you guys to arrange this meeting. There's been a lot of water under the bridge over the last couple of years. We haven't come to you, to be quite frank, we haven't made any major decisions of this magnitude. There's been a lot of decisions, some of them caused by the pandemic, but I would be happy if the township would like to review that in detail. I'd be happy to go through it. I believe, and I'm quite confident, that we are in compliance, particularly because of our presence here today, where we sought you out to have this conversation and get your feedback early enough in the process, long before any decision is made. I think that maybe is a bit of evidence of our goodwill in that respect.
That was a question that I was just indicating that I know the agreement, in regards to major policy decisions, there might be, room for where reasonable minds could differ as to what constitutes a major policy decision. I don't think this by itself is the only one that's been made during that last 7-8 years. I'm just kind of at least reminding everybody that we do have in place a transportation funding agreement that is supposed to dictate and govern how the parties are to act with each other in regards to this type of information sharing, budgetary, audit review, et cetera. And I just want to make sure that we were on the same page in that regard, because I can't recall too many meetings where we've had that since the last 4 or 5 years anyways.
It is good to be reminded, and we are very cognizant of it.
Well, Matt, Ryan, and Forrest, thank you. And y'all have just been very patient and kind at the meeting that we had, and we appreciate you here today as well, and you seem to care. So we appreciate that, and hopefully the input, we don't want to be a Debbie Downer or a Brenda Bummer or hell no Heather, I don't know. But, I don't want to say Stan, he was really hot, smoking Stan, no. But, we don't want to come across that way. You asked for feedback, so we were just being honest, which is what you wanted.
Which is exactly why we're here. And
so we thank you very much.
And thank you, if I may. I do appreciate your honesty and directness. It is important for us to hear from all of our constituencies, and you're certainly no different in that respect. So thank you for your directness and your honesty. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
And we'll be back. This decision has yet to be made.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is Giovanna and our procurement policy.
Hello, Giovanna Neal. I'm going to take this off. I can't breathe. All right, so I finally have a draft of the procurement policy. It's been a long time coming, probably like 10 years. So the last one that we have is called the financial policy, what we have currently. It was adopted in 2007. It's very outdated, so we needed to do some updating. So what I've tried to do, we did have a committee. On that committee that we had, 3 of the people retired, yes, and one was very busy, so it's kind of went by the wayside, and I actually had tremendous help from Travis McDougall, who is here today. And I wouldn't have been able to do this without him because I don't know how to do Word. So I can do an Excel spreadsheet like no one else, but Word documents I couldn't do. So he has been a tremendous help. So I would like to have your input. This is truly a work session. I need some opinions, and I did ask for you to basically look at the approval levels. I've incorporated from a lot of material. So our own ordinance 69 and 116, I've used that. I used information from the MTA, Michigan Township Association. The template I used was from the Michigan Governmental Finance Association group. So that was the main template I used, and I tried to incorporate our ordinances in there, and so it got very lengthy. We did have to put a couple of things that were not in the old one, things like the prohibiting any Iran-linked businesses. And then also, I did need to put a part in for federal grant for our ARPA money that we've received. We did have a little bit of stuff in our ordinances, but they wanted a clear part that just said federal grant award. So I put that in here as well. And I need to have this all completed and adopted and approved by the board by the end of the year, because we will have to do a single audit for the funds that we have received from federal. Anything over $750,000 does require a single audit. So we will have that this year. So it's important to get your input and to bring it back for you to take a look at and again. And so what I'd like to do is, if you have any thoughts or opinions on the approval levels that we had, I did print out, everybody has them? So I print out summaries for everyone. Here's summaries. The one that we're currently using is the one in the red. So those are our levels. We don't have these, do you? Oh, okay. That way the people behind can see. And I don't know if anybody has any, Lisa's bringing those up. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts or anything. I do know that there's a couple things I've already seen that I want to correct and change. I do have one of the summaries incorrect on the approval level. It's just not matching what's in my section. So, does anybody have any comments right now? How does everyone feel about the levels? So I'm looking, I don't know if anybody, do you have your?
Yep. Page 107 in the packet is the new proposed one.
Oh, the new one?
And that's 107 in the packet. And they go from $0 to $999.99. Thank you, Travis. And then 1,000 to 3,000, 3,000 to 10, 10 to 15, and then 15 plus for non-public works, and then public work projects are listed separately.
So I have moved those up. I did use several different communities, the MGFOA example. I just tried to put it so that we could, function, still do our competitive bidding, make sure that we hit all of our statutory regulations, and still run our township. So does anybody have any, I don't know if you want me to go through each one of them. What's the thoughts?
Joe, I guess I'll just share one of the things that we discussed earlier when we were going over it. The 3 full-time officials, we met and just, kind of went word for word through it and had a couple edits and tweaks to it. And then just talking about that levels sheet in the new policy, the one thing that there were a few things, but the one that I just wanted to point out here tonight is that the 3 verbal quotes, we, all agreed that, you can't really hang your hat on something that's verbal or he said, she said over the phone. So we were going to change that, and then a couple formatting things. And we talked a lot about Mitten and My Deal and the differences between those. Trying to think of what else. The purchasing designee or
Purchasing
purchasing
agent is all
agent
through, yes.
and that terminology. So historically, we've had a purchasing agent that was we believe the title of a union job in the AFSCME contract, and we just want to be thoughtful about using that. But I understand, I think from Giovanna, that purchasing agent is a widely used terminology in many financial policies across the state and country. So we did discuss that. Giovanna mentioned the importance of having it done with a grant piece for the ARPA funds. I do want to point out that, of course, there's like an ethics piece in here. Of course, you all know we have our wonderful ethics policy for our board that we've adopted, but this also includes township employees, both current and former. It goes, over all the unlawful expenditures, just to really point out and make sure that we're always conscious and thoughtful of how, to best spend our taxpayer dollars. I'm trying to think of what else we discussed. And then mostly we landed on the levels and like thinking about, are those levels appropriate or not? So on the red one that's on the board, you can see that if it's greater than 7,500, you have to go to the board for approval. And so what happens then is that it just kind of slows down everything in the township. Like if a department head really, urgently needs to purchase something, the 7,500 has, in the past, maybe worked, but I think that the idea was to, just make the whole process a little bit more efficient. So on the new proposed ones, you don't come to the board until you're over $14,999.99. Thank you, Travis. So anyway, so I think Giovanna was, if I heard you right, Joe, you're looking for like guidance on that particularly, and then any other edits that we might have or suggestions?
Correct. So I did bump those levels up quite a bit. Actually, what we had before is anything like under $50 that could be petty cash. I don't even have that listed on here, petty cash. I don't know if that's a necessity. I think that's, we don't use that quite a bit, so I did not put that in here. And then anything under $100 did not have to have a purchase order, or they didn't have to have any authorization other than the manager.
Lisa, can you go to page 93 in the packet, just so everyone can see the proposed one, please?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so what I've done is I've tried to give the managers a little bit more room to process, and what I've suggested is having a purchase order for everything. That'll encumber the amounts. Just from zero on, you do need a purchase order. That's a little bit different than here. A purchase order wasn't required for anything under $100 before. But again, I feel that purchase orders are there for a reason. It encumbers the money, which means it already expenses it, and so that you can actually tell what's in your line items as you go. And then I've actually went from 0 to $999.99. That the manager can actually approve as long as he has his quotes. Well, actually, I'm sorry, I have that as a no, that they don't need to go out for any bids or quotes, anything under 1,000. So again, if it's the board's pleasure that
93.
they need to go and have written quotes, I think 0, up to a certain amount, but I did push it to 1,000. So if you want to look at that 0 to 500, that's where I needed some help. If you wanted those levels changed as we're doing them.
I do know
It's not
that
working.
you asked all the department heads for input on the levels.
Yes, I did. And I did have a couple of our department heads And managers did, yes, this is the proposed one. I did have a couple of our department heads and managers respond back, with very, very good feedback. I did do a couple edits based on what they had presented. Mike Hoffmeister was gracious enough to do it, and Mike Saarinen turned his in. Again, Travis had a lot of input because they do the purchasing. They do the buying, so we kind of wanted to make this easy. But again, I put different, in the packet I gave you, I put a lot of different summaries from different places. The one from Waterford is the example from MTA that I got from MTA. Then again, the Michigan, the MGFOA. I did have Canton's in there. So I had several, so I just kind of based, so these were pretty much my assumptions. So that's why I wanted you guys to, I wanted your feedback on the levels.
And we'll probably bring it to the next meeting.
Oh, yes,
So
definitely.
you have time to ask questions again and think about it and look at
Yeah.
the different levels.
And then what I'm looking at, so, yeah, so kind of focus on what we need there, and then the authorization of each of those. Now, there is a different authorization here that's at $10,000 to the $15,000 or $14,999.99, that the department manager, department head, the supervisor, and 2 of the full-time elected officials would approve. I did change that in the reading, not the summary, and that was changed to the supervisor and 1 of the other full-time elected officials. So I did change that from, so that we still have the supervisor approving and 1 of the other 2 elected officials.
And Joe, if I could just add that I really like that you kept the purchase order for all the things. Those always, like we always talked about purchase orders as a trustee, and I was like, oh, okay, a purchase, I didn't know what that looked like, but it's actually, you log in and there's a whole algorithm of how your purchase gets approved. And at the end of it, even once I approve, if Lisa purchases something, it comes to me for approval. And then once I approve it, it goes to Brenda for approval. So that's one of the great things about a purchase order. And then it just keeps track, like Joe was saying, in your budget so that you know what funds are expected to be going out or not. So it's really helpful, and I like that a lot.
It's the workflow on the purchase orders always end up, I have to approve all of them.
Yes,
So,
that is correct.
Yeah.
Yep, every single one of them.
yeah.
So it doesn't go to Stan at all?
Pardon me?
Just you and Brenda?
Just me.
Yeah, just Brenda.
Just Brenda.
And then, under the new proposal, with the higher limits, instead of just the supervisor, we won't use people, just the supervisor, you have a second elected official also authorizing that. So it's not just the supervisor's eyes on it, it allows another set of eyes. So. And their signature will be part of the purchasing process, and the workflow will show that they approved it as well.
You saying the 2 signatures, Madam Chair, 2 people's signatures?
Yep, for the ones that are at a higher limit.
Yeah.
Because you didn't want one person, having that much authority, I wouldn't think, without a check and balance.
Right.
It's not that much authority, but it seems like it is, when you look at it.
Somebody has to sign off, and 2 people could sign off.
Yeah, and at Yucca, we changed it. We also increased the amount at Yucca because of all the daily activities and what it, took 2 weeks in order to purchase something. And our directors always, and so do we, send out, emails to let you know if it's, because if we have to do an emergency purchase, like for the dam or something, then we have to do it anyways, and we bring it back. But we always send it out to the board to let you guys know. So,
Right, and I do see something that I do need to change, and that is in the 3,000 to the 10,000, I'll just say the 10,000 range, where it says purchasing agent, that needs to be the supervisor. I do need to change that to the supervisor in both the written and in the summary. That should say the supervisor, so I will be changing that.
It's
The
statutory.
the supervisor can actually appoint a purchasing agent if she'll be gone or incapacitated for a while. She'll be able to do that. That's in the front, and that is under statutory regulations. You are able to appoint someone.
I've never done that,
No, you have not.
and neither did
Taken your
Ruth Ann.
computer with you. Take your computer with you. But, and we appreciate that.
But like they
So-
said, if I'm in a coma, that's the example. If I'm in a coma, then who's going to do it? I go, that's a good point. So we'll designate someone. All right, so we'll bring this back.
Yeah, so please let me know if you have questions and any tweaking that needs to be done here. I did want one real quick thing is I just want you to look at, we don't have to talk about it now, but it's section 3263, and it's the purchasing for equipment. That is something that I put in there because you always have, we ask to waive the financial policy. And most times what it is they've, the managers or department heads have already gone out and gotten the bids or quotes for this specific equipment that does not need specs done by any engineers. And so they've already got that. And so what they don't want to do is just, they didn't want to come in and ask you to go out for bids or quotes and then have to come back again with those when they could already do that because it's not a specialty. So I did put that in there. So if you could look at that, and then we'll talk about that next time. Okay,
Thank you, Joe.
you're welcome.
Thanks for all your work, Joe.
We have 5 minutes before the next meeting, because I know Mike and Mark Nelson are here, but we do, if we could, we have to take a little break. So it's 6:55, and we'll be right back.